Hello and welcome to Real HIFI Help. I'm going today to give you some deeper perspective on the whole studies thing that we are fed with every day and how it can possibly help you with your life and sorting through information. So how some studies are faked. Have you ever heard some study in the news saying stuff like, newest independent study shows that if mice eat people, they will end up becoming people? This is just meant as a joke, but it's more in the way of newest study shows that tomatoes can promote cancer, or newest study shows that vitamin C does not cure coronavirus, or something like newest study shows that sweeteners do not actually do any measurable harm. Now, who do you think ordered that study? The last one. So, what I've noticed is that to make a study, all that you need is to do some reverse engineering, meaning that you just want what it is that you want people to know and how not to disclose how you got that result. So, point two being is that you can make any study show anything if you are a certain company or person that wants to promote a special product or agenda. And so, for example, if you want C vitamin not to show that it's the answer, for example, solving the coronavirus problem, you just make sure that you take a patient that is in a late enough stage of the virus, and then you make sure that you give them a bad enough doses with a bad enough quality of C vitamin pill, and that you do not have the pill with any green foods or water. Then the study will then show that it will not solve the coronavirus. And then on top of that, you do not mention the fact that vitamins pills do not by itself need anything to interact with, or any other factor that could go against your cause. So I'm basically just saying that there are so many studies throwing all kinds of random bullshit information at the public, and I just want you guys to recognize that these aren't random studies that are performed. These are studies that are usually performed by some pretty big companies with some hidden agenda. And you should recognize that you just have to test things properly. So I'm going to go on to that bit now. So I could just create a bad study without having to give in the proper context or relation to how that study was ordered. So this is basically to make people aware of the fact that many times no responsibility is taken to make such claims, and that it many times is just propaganda made to indirectly promote another product that is not mentioned, like I said before. But the problem with this is that we get this type of information every day, and it makes us numb, okay? Because we just constantly fed bad information. And no one is really held accountable for all this bad information. And it promotes a sense of nothing is right or wrong, and there is no hope, and we're all screwed. So you need the intention, the context, and the source, and many other variables in order to properly view a study, a clinical test or whatever. And just to relate this directly to the hi-fi world, it's the exact same thing that is done with, for example, when audio cables are tested. You have this hi-fi magazine or some other source testing many cables against each other, like for example 100 cables at a very different price category. And then at the end of the test you have a conclusion saying something like this: there might be a difference between the most cheap and expensive cables that we've tested but we at this blank magazine could not hear a noticeable difference. So you might as well buy the cheapest cables, which is a shameless indirect sponsor attempt. So just to tell you guys that I've been a supporter for many years, and I've noticed that a lot of people in general, not just in the hi-fi world, but generally when they're dealing with technology and other aspects of life, that they have an inability not to test things properly. And I'm just going to give you some of the things that I do when I test hi-fi equipment to give you some inspiration. So in this case, if I would be handling this specific tests, point one is that I would first of all not test all of these cables on the same system, because the lower quality a system you have and the worse it is set up, the more confusing and bad results will probably then occur. I've tried this so many times. You don't want to test all kinds of different classes of cables on the same system. It will only give you some proper results, some pretty decent results, if you test it on a very high quality system, which most people do not have. So that is one of the reasons why many of these hi-fi tests of cables, why they can't hear difference, because of things like this. Second of all, I would also have, if it was possible, 100 different systems to test them on with different gear and different types of sounds. And I would then test them with systems that had regular power and filtered power, and different rooms, so on and so on. And I would also make sure that for every cable that I changed, that I let them all settle for one day to be able to make a fair judgment. Now what happens is that when you test a cable, you are putting something, you're connecting something that is basically, you can't see this, but it's vibrating. So it amazes me still to see it at these days that Nordost and AudioQuest at shows do these A and B blind tests, where they show you one of their cables and then they play a bit of music, and what they do is then they don't always play the same music. So they play some music. Most of the times it's the same music, but then they just connect to another model, another test cable, and then the audience goes like, it sounds different, but I'm not really sure why it's different. So in order for a cable to be properly tested, it has to usually be burned in, and it has to settle. If you don't let that cable settle, it's going to vibrate, and usually it's going to lose a lot of its stability that makes you able as a person to really judge what's going on with a cable. So making a stupid test like that at a show is more of a way of promoting certain products instead of you getting a fair fair amount of proper conditions for you to perceive those changes in. So it's just to let you guys know about this. And also, like I said before, there's the burn-in process to take into consideration. Some cables need a lot of burn-in, others don't really need any. So there's that factor. And I would then also disclose things like the time of day that things were tested, because if it was in the busy hours where generally people are home preparing dinner, or if it's at the late hours when people are in bed and there's probably only like 1% of the population still using the electrical grid, you will get two different sounds. Of course, this won't be very noticeable if you deal with sound equipment that's on a very low scale, not set properly up. But I noticed this on my power system. If I just connect my electrical car to the power system and then start up my my whole music system, I will notice that the musical flow is usually a bit more congested, not quite as clear, and I have to like almost pull the the speakers up, so you're not really getting that full release, that full freedom of movement within the whole soundstage. Now, this is also one of the reasons why it's so easy for me to hear things like this, is because it's a pretty good system and it's a pretty efficient speaker. When you have a very efficient speaker and you have a very short circuit in that amplifier, there's usually a hell of a lot of response. Now, everything on my chain is, I wouldn't say close to the very maximum of what's possible, but it's pretty good. So I can hear a lot of small, subtle changes in the whole power grid. So, for example, just to give you a very good example of this, the first day of year, when you usually get a very hot summer's day, that is one of the times of year where the whole electrical power grid is under a lot less stress than normal. So if it's suddenly like 30 degrees and it's a March month and everybody is off work, you can usually count on that day giving you some unusually really good high quality power to your system. Now, just because you can't hear that on your system doesn't mean that that condition does not exist. I've experienced that a couple of times a year, but I've also experienced this almost magical hour where stuff just sounds really bad. And that's usually when people come home in my country, which is around 5-ish. So from 5 to 8, that's usually when things sound pretty bad in my country. And I've noticed that, for example, a Sunday before people get ready for work, usually around 1 hour before midnight, you can certainly hear that the whole power grid has almost turned off, so that the few people that are still up and listening to the equipment will gain quite a bit of better sound just waiting for hours like that. So it's just to tell you guys, these things do actually exist and it's worth taking into consideration. So that's also one of the reasons why I never listen to music on some of the really bad hours a day. You have to find out what hours are good where you live, because it can be different from region to region. And I would also then take into consideration things like testing the same cable with different lengths, just to see if there's a difference and to get a better understanding of the cable. Or maybe even testing with an older model. I would then also have me and 2 other people present to share their opinions, for me to get a better understanding of what it is that we've heard, so we can communicate that to each other, so we can get more in contact with what actually is going on, and really understanding what the hell is it that we're listening to. Because sometimes just getting proper feedback from some other people can make you realize stuff that you didn't realize before. I would then also make notes of first impressions and how the sound would then evolve. I would have a blind test and a non-blind test to tune my senses in, not letting the price and the look of the cables affect my reasoning. Now, I'm not the type of guy who usually believes in blind test, and I'm going to explain why. Because having a blind test does, in theory, make something seem, what can I say? Seem as if you're giving a more neutral way of testing something. But you also have to take into consideration that there are so many other factors in connection with that blind test that you will miss out on. And one of those few ones are, if you're not physically in connection with the equipment and you understand that you, for example, have this cable and it's connected to this device and you're powering up your units in this order, then when you lose that connection, you have a problem relating the things that you have changed with what actually is happening. So it can be very confusing sometimes, and some other times it can actually give you a better understanding of what's going on. So that's why I said a blind and a non-blind test to give a fair test condition. And I would then start off with writing a piece of paper, with a few measuring points, like, for example, bass quality and soundstage and other things like that, just to remind me of some points that I have to bring up later, so I don't get unfocused and overwhelmed by the amount of data that's coming in. And then I would also reveal, after that test is done, exactly how I got to the results that I achieved, and the conditions that would promote some good sound with some brands and their models, but it would be full disclosure to show exactly how I got to that result. And I would also mention that there might be some other aspects that I haven't covered that possibly could affect the whole results. Now, this is a bit off topic. This is just a general thing. It's closely related to this, but not entirely. So this is a personal opinion from me, having noticed a lot of things changing in my job. I believe that in many years, much of the information that we've been receiving in regards to all aspects in life are meant to overwhelm people and shock them, and to turn a lot of people into non-believers by breaking tradition and not doing proper research and not being held accountable, which is very important. It is so easy not to believe in anything and not have any values in life and not have any self-respect and class, and take the easy route by saying this is why they are conspiring against us, and the coronavirus is linked to 5G, and I don't want you to know this and this and this, and then you end. It's just, yeah. I just find us constantly looking at stuff like this at YouTube, and it kind of annoys me quite a bit, because in some aspects what they're doing is that they're taking something that's partially right and then connecting it to all kinds of other things that aren't entirely right. And just want to say that it's a lot more difficult maintaining a true belief by challenging the so-called facts. And I believe that in a society with truth and quality is simply the best measurements of man, and not this endless broad amount of data we all take in without questioning it. So this is a trend that I've noticed at work, and other people also who are my friends have noticed, is that there's just an endless amount of data that makes no sense, that is just pure propaganda, that we are constantly taking in. It doesn't matter if you're powering up your PC and you have to look at the Windows Start menu and you have to see some kind of Microsoft ad there, or if you start up your browser, it's still a Microsoft news page, or whatever it is. There's just a hell of a lot of really bad information out there. And if you look at the last 30 years in the tech industry, you notice that the trend is going very broad and not having a hell of a lot of quality to do with it. And I found that going broad is usually a symptom, wrote it here, as a function that works great with documenting business growth. Now that is true. I can understand why a lot of companies are doing this nowadays, that they're making an audio product, and instead of having 5 or 10 that they did in the olden days, suddenly they've got 30, 40, or 50 products. And you are, in fact, probably selling to a different variety of customers because of this, but you're also losing the overall what's it called, quality stamp that makes that company good, because you're kind of prostituting yourself selling equipment that isn't quite as good. So I find it very sad, but it's a harsh part of the whole business world that a lot of companies are doing this. So and it's very difficult to use quality as a measuring unit, almost impossible. So what we do is create a lot of new technology features and document certain technologies out of context. So I'm going to give you a good example of this. So that is why, for example, 24-bit audio out of context is better than 16-bit audio. Yes, I agree. It is correct that it is better out of context. But then again, we must ask ourselves, is then 24-bit the ultimate solution, working at the main cause of the problem, or is it just attacking a symptom, promoting a cheaper design? And I believe that it's the later one. And this is just to show you guys an example of what's going on with the audio world, because a lot of companies have realized that they can't use components that are more than 1, 2, or 3 out of on a 10 scale. So because they realize this, they realize it's mostly about marketing and design and making the product look really good. And this is a problem. This is a real disease that the whole audio industry is going through at the moment. So 10 years ago, we would probably have $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 equipment as a pretty normal standard. Nowadays, a lot of people are going with equipment that only costs like $1,000 or $2,000. And it's really bad for the audio industry, because when you keep replacing a new generation of equipment with a bad one that almost does the same for a lower price, you are indirectly prostituting yourself and getting used to a worse quality of sound. And because you only have a pretty bad quality of sound to compare it with, you won't feel that you have lost anything. So just to tell you guys, do not settle, get some proper equipment. And in regards to going broad, I believe that we're seeing a lot of people with regular jobs having to read more and more each day. We have to be faster, smarter, more fake, judge things faster, and follow the kinds of tricks that are given to us. And the information flow that we're dealing with nowadays is just insane. It doesn't matter if you're in school, college, or if you're taking some kind of special education. There is a lot of the stuff that we're doing in this world that just is simply crazy, because we're working on this very broad scale of overlapping technologies. So we're going from one technology to another, and of course they don't speak the same language, so we create another technology and another technology, and then we suddenly reach a point where that isn't very popular, that product. We ditch that product, we create a whole new product. And I just feel that maybe it's just me becoming old, wanting to have everything go back to the olden days, but I feel that it's really difficult staying in the game understanding how things work, because it requires so much of you nowadays to really connect with something and do something in a proper way. So just to give you an example, there's basically no longer something called a customer service or a support service at a company as a separate job function. Everything is basically being multitasked, versatile, integrated, so that you as a person can no longer do a certain type of job. You have to do like two or three other jobs together with that job in order for you to keep your job. But here's the point. It's not by getting more in salary. It's by just being able to keep the job. And that's what I'm saying. We should not allow this to happen. And I believe that when you do that, you become less of a good person. And in order to survive and feel something, you take drugs, you take alcohol, you get a tattoo. To feel alive, and you kind of lose a grip on life, and you don't really, like I said before, you don't really believe in anything. Everything is just random, and the whole corporate world is dominating how we as a people live our lives. And that's just basically what I'm trying to get at, that we should promote being a very good, high quality, ethical type of people that live perhaps a bit more simple life, where we don't need quite as much technology, where we kind of go back to the basic things that we do need. So I believe personally that we shouldn't in this age have something called cloud technology. I don't believe that we are all safe trusting that our personal documents, where it has information that can be used against us, that we shouldn't be able to keep that on our own computer, having that being safe, having to trust a company that takes preventative measures. I do not believe that that is the correct thing to do. It's probably the most practical thing to do, and it's probably the thing that will cost more mid-sized companies a less amount of money. But if we don't own our data, we don't really own anything. We're basically just all sharing our data, making it all available, and getting into this kind of society where everybody can look at every piece of information, and officially there's protection, but in real fact there really isn't, because behind the scenes they are selling these pieces of information to basically everybody. So, and also one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up this video is because I also see that if you look at, for example, the Cisco IT certification, if you look at where they're going at in the IT world, networking world, you start noticing stuff that you can no longer really be a first line supporter, a second line, or a third line supporter. Now you have all of these things slowly being put in there where you become a second line supporter, and it is required for you to be ahead of the game and to be able to keep your job for a couple of years, to also do some programming, and to also be able to sell that product so you can deal with potential customers. So basically what's happening is that the regular person who has a job is becoming less and less relevant because of the information that's available. So you have to be some kind of a freak nowadays that basically is a half good supporter, half good programmer, and a half good salesman, because it looks good business wise, and business wise on paper you are producing more and are more valuable for the company because you can do what you're doing. And I just find that this is one of the things that is just really annoying, and I think that we have to just be aware that this condition actually exists. So my message is just to be real and to promote a really good high quality life. And yeah, that's basically just the message for today. Sorry guys for making this a long video and not being quite focused with my message, but that's all for today, and have a nice day.